In the world of true crime, some stories are strange. And then there are those that defy all logic. Twisted tales so dark, so bizarre, they blur the line between reality and nightmare. Today, we're diving deep into the top 5 most chilling and mind-bending true crime stories. Cases so twisted, they'll haunt you long after the video ends. She didn't know it at the time, but this would be the final night of her life. 19-year-old Maple Battalia was everything her friends described her to be: bright, bubbly, and full of promise. That evening, she was at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, surrounded by classmates, her laughter carrying across the library as she studied late into the night. It was a normal night for her. Notes spread out on the table, a cup of coffee nearby. The easy comfort of being with people who loved her. But outside the glow of the library lights, someone else was watching. Someone who didn't see Maple as the talented student or aspiring actress that everyone admired. To him, she wasn't a young woman with dreams of becoming a doctor or a daughter who filled her family's home with warmth. He saw her as something else entirely, something to control, something he couldn't let go of. As the hours ticked by, Maple remained unaware of the shadow following her. Her final hours were filled with joy, but the night itself was closing in. And then, silence shattered. Calls began pouring into the police station. Gunshots, 7, maybe more, echoed through the parking lot. Witnesses scrambled for cover, voices trembling as they dialed 911. Within minutes, police officers were racing to the scene. The first calls hit dispatch at 10:04 p.m. One man's voice trembled as he told operators, "I just heard gunshots, at least 7. Seconds later, more calls flooded in. Students hiding behind cars, residents in nearby apartments, everyone said the same thing. A burst of gunfire had erupted inside the campus parking structure. Sergeant Kevin Jeffrey was among the first to respond. He sped toward the 3rd floor of the garage where terrified witnesses pointed. There, between 2 parked vehicles, he saw a young woman lying in a pool of blood. It was Maple. She had been shot 3 times. Deep stab wounds marked the back of her head. Blood stained the ground around her. Against all odds, Maple was still breathing, barely clinging to life. Officers immediately called for paramedics, who fought desperately to stabilize her. Time was slipping away, but every second mattered. As Maple was rushed toward the nearest hospital, investigators began scouring the scene. A large knife lay nearby, slick with blood, but carefully wiped clean of fingerprints. A single bullet casing was recovered, but the gun itself had vanished. Her wallet and student ID were found close to her body, confirming her identity. Back at the hospital, doctors worked through the night, but the damage was catastrophic. Hours later, at 1:07 p.m., Maple's family received the words no parent should ever hear. Their daughter was gone. Her father collapsed in grief. Her mother, overcome with rage and despair, pressed her forehead to the officer delivering the news and screamed, "Bring me vengeance." The loss shattered them. Maple had been the jewel of their lives, a daughter whose future stretched wide open. In one night, everything was stolen. News spread quickly across the community. The murder of a 19-year-old student on campus sent shockwaves through the city. Reporters swarmed the hospital, and soon, Maple's face was on every screen, her name on every front page. But for investigators, grief had to give way to answers. Someone had executed this attack with precision. Someone had stalked Maple, waited for the perfect moment, and struck. And if they were bold enough to murder her on a university campus, police feared this wasn't the end. The investigation had only just begun. Before detectives could chase leads, the world needed to understand who had been lost. Maple Battalia wasn't just another student on campus. She was extraordinary. A straight-A achiever, she was determined to become a doctor, spending long hours buried in textbooks, chasing a future in medicine. But Maple's ambitions didn't stop there. She had a love for performing, already stepping into the world of acting while balancing her studies. By 17, she had appeared in commercials, and by 19, she'd landed small roles in television and film, including Diary of a Wimpy Kid and The Secret Circle. Friends remembered her as vibrant, someone whose laughter filled every room. Family described her as their brightest jewel, a daughter who never gave them a reason to worry. Her future was limitless until it was cut short. For investigators, this wasn't just a case file. This was about justice for a girl who should have had decades ahead of her. And they knew the answers might be hidden in the cameras watching that night. The crime scene left investigators with little to go on. A bloody knife wiped clean, a single shell casing, and a victim who could no longer speak for herself. If they were going to find Maple's killer, they would need eyes. And luckily, the university campus had plenty. Simon Fraser University was equipped with nearly 100 security cameras, 32 of them covering the parking structures alone. For detectives, that meant hundreds of hours of footage to comb through. But it also meant hope. Somewhere, hidden in those recordings, could be the story of Maple's final night. The first step was establishing her timeline. Investigators pulled footage from a camera near the library entrance. They scanned through the late evening hours, expecting to see Maple arrive around 9:30 p.m. She was easy to recognize. Dark jacket, white sandals, her hair tied back. But as minutes turned into hours on the tape, there was no sign of her. That raised immediate questions. Had she entered from a different route? Had the camera missed her? The absence was strange enough that detectives broadened their search. Switching angles, they checked a camera covering the pathway from the parking lot to the library. At 10:22 p.m., two dark-haired girls came into frame, heading toward the elevator. One of them, white sandals, dark jacket, looked exactly like Maple. But the video was blurry, and investigators couldn't be certain. It wasn't enough to stand in court, and they needed more. So they moved to the interior library cameras. Finally, a breakthrough. The footage showed Maple clearly, laughing, smiling, surrounded by friends. She looked carefree, completely unaware of the danger stalking her outside. Detectives leaned in, hoping to track her every step. But then, the camera swung away. A preset rotation sent the lens panning across the library floor. And when it turned back, Maple was gone. Investigators were furious. It almost felt like someone had sabotaged the feed, deliberately robbing them of answers. But the truth was more frustrating. It was just bad luck, an automated camera that turned at the worst possible moment. Determined not to lose her trail, detectives pulled footage from the library exit. At 10:01 p.m., Maple appeared again, this time walking with three young men. They moved calmly, nothing about them suggesting the violence that was about to unfold. From there, police followed them to another camera pointed toward the parking lot. Just minutes later, Maple's life would be cut short. Investigators needed this footage to reveal who was with her at that critical moment. But once again, fate intervened. The street camera overlooking the parking lot zoomed out, its automated movement shifting away right as Maple and the three men stepped into frame. By the time it returned, the parking lot was empty. Maple was already fighting for her life on the ground, and the killer had vanished. The cameras had given detectives pieces of the puzzle, but none that fit together. To make sense of them, they needed to identify the young men walking with Maple. And one name would soon surface, a name that pulled investigators deeper into the mystery. Dylan Dillon, an old friend from high school, and one of the last people to see her alive. With hours of footage reviewed and still no clear image of Maple's killer, frustration was mounting inside the investigation room. Cameras had caught Maple laughing in the library and leaving with friends, but at the moment she needed to be seen most, the angles failed. Detectives were left with more questions than answers, but then one officer spotted something unusual. On footage from a street camera outside campus, a white sports car appeared, speeding away at a dangerously high pace. The timestamp read 10:04 p.m., the exact moment dispatchers were flooded with 911 calls about gunshots. The timing was too perfect to ignore. Investigators froze the frame. The vehicle was clearly a Dodge Charger, its headlights cutting through the night. But there was a problem. The car was moving so fast, the license plate was nothing more than a blur. They had a make and model, but not an owner. Determined to chase the lead, detectives went back through earlier footage from the university. Hours before the murder, at 8:07 p.m., they spotted it again, the same Dodge Charger pulling into the campus parking lot. The silhouette matched perfectly. Whoever was driving that car hadn't just been passing by. They had been watching, waiting, circling like a predator. The theory quickly formed. Maple hadn't been the victim of random violence. Someone had come to that campus with one purpose: to hunt her. Now the investigation had focus. Detectives shifted resources toward tracking the Charger. How many white Dodge Chargers were even registered in the province? The answer was surprising. Very few. Most belonged not to private owners, but to rental agencies. That revelation sent investigators racing to local rental offices. If the car was rented, there would be a paper trail, a name that could tie directly back to the killer. Meanwhile, the community reeled. News of Maple's death had spread across the city, and the grief was overwhelming. Hundreds attended vigils and memorial services, holding candles in silence. Strangers who had never met Maple mourned as if she were their own sister or daughter. The tragedy of a promising 19-year-old cut down in her prime was impossible to ignore. But inside the investigation, detectives kept circling back to the Charger. The timing, the location, the way it appeared just before Maple entered the library. It was more than coincidence. Someone in that car had been shadowing her movements the entire evening. Then came the breakthrough. At one rental agency, records showed that a white Dodge Charger had been rented on the very day Maple was killed. And surveillance footage from that agency confirmed it. Two young men walking in together, signing paperwork, waiting as the car was pulled around. One of them matched the description of a student named Gersamar Gary Betty. But Betty wasn't alone. Standing beside him was another man, someone who would change the course of the investigation forever. Maple knew him. She had once loved him, her ex-boyfriend. And suddenly, the case shifted from a mystery to something far darker. A story of obsession, betrayal, and rage. When investigators confirmed that Maple's ex-boyfriend, Gary Dollywall, was linked to the white Dodge Charger, the puzzle pieces suddenly began to make sense. What had seemed like a random, calculated ambush now looked like something more personal, something fueled by obsession. Gary and Maple's relationship had started like many others. At first, he seemed charming, attentive, and supportive. To Maple's family, he appeared to be a good match, someone who made her happy. But that impression didn't last long. Gary's charm hid darker traits: jealousy, possessiveness, and a need for control. When Maple discovered he had cheated, she ended the relationship. For her, it was the natural choice to move forward. For him, it was unthinkable. He couldn't accept being left behind. Detectives began digging into his past, and soon another troubling detail surfaced. Just days before the murder, Gary had confronted Maple at a Tim Hortons cafe. Surveillance footage showed Maple sitting with her friend Dylan when Gary stormed in. His rage was immediate. Without warning, he swung at Dylan, starting a fight in the middle of the cafe. The confrontation ended with Maple leading Gary outside, climbing into his car, and leaving with him. To investigators, that footage was chilling. It showed exactly what they feared: a young man consumed by jealousy, unwilling to let Maple move on, and increasingly aggressive. Maple's friends later told police how shaken she had been after that encounter. One even begged her to seek a restraining order, warning her that Gary's anger was dangerous. Maple had brushed it off, insisting she could handle it. But in reality, the situation was escalating faster than anyone imagined. For police, the motive was becoming clear. Gary wasn't just hurt. He was enraged. He believed Maple belonged to him, and the thought of her with someone else drove him to violence. His jealousy wasn't just an emotion, it was a weapon. Now, paired with the evidence of the Dodge Charger rental, investigators could see how carefully he had plotted his next move. He had an accomplice, Gersamar Betty, who rented the car in his name. He had a weapon, both a knife and a gun, and most chilling of all, he had the patience to wait for hours in that parking lot until the moment Maple was alone. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Police needed undeniable proof tying Gary directly to the attack. They needed to show that he wasn't just a jealous ex, but a cold-blooded killer who had stalked Maple and struck when no one else was watching. As detectives pressed forward, they found themselves in a race against time. Gary already knew how to hide in the shadows, and without stronger evidence, there was a chance he might slip through their fingers entirely. The investigation now entered its most critical stage. The cameras had led them to Gary Dollywall, but the question was, could they find the proof to put him away? With Gary Dollywall now at the center of suspicion, investigators doubled their efforts to lock him in with hard evidence. The white Dodge Charger was their strongest lead. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed something undeniable. That breakthrough came from forensics. When specialists combed through the vehicle, they discovered a single shell casing lodged under the hood. Ballistic tests confirmed it matched the caliber of the bullets that struck Maple. It was a direct connection. Whoever pulled the trigger had been inside that car. Detectives then returned to the rental agency footage. Frame by frame, they confirmed what they already suspected. Gersamar Betty had signed the paperwork, but Gary was right there with him. Surveillance even caught them waiting together outside as the car was brought around. For police, it was the proof they needed. Gary hadn't just been jealous. He had planned Maple's death. Armed with this evidence, investigators brought Betty in for questioning. They hoped he might turn on Gary, but Betty stayed silent, refusing to give them anything. Still, his loyalty wouldn't be enough to protect them. Soon after, both men were arrested. The weight of the case was finally coming down on Gary Dollywall, the man Maple had once loved. As the case moved forward, more details surfaced. Gary had stalked Maple for hours that night, circling the campus in the Charger, waiting for her to be alone. The rage he carried from their breakup had grown into something darker, something deadly. For Maple's family, the arrests brought relief, but it wasn't closure. They had lost their daughter forever. For detectives, it was the final confirmation of what they had suspected all along. Maple's death wasn't random. It was the result of one man's obsession and his refusal to let her go. But the story wasn't over. In the interrogation room, Gary's silence would eventually break, and when it did, the truth of Maple's final moments would be revealed in chilling detail. With both men in custody, detectives pressed for answers. At first, Gary Dhaliwal refused to speak, but the weight of evidence was crushing. Eventually, he broke. In a chilling confession, Gary admitted what investigators had already pieced together. He had never accepted Maple's decision to leave him. Jealousy consumed him, especially after seeing her with Dylan just days earlier. To him, Maple wasn't free to move on. She was his possession. Fueled by rage, Gary armed himself with a gun and a knife. With Betty's help, he rented the Dodge Charger, then stalked Maple's movements across campus. For 4 hours he waited, circling, watching, until she was alone in the dimly lit parking structure. That was when he attacked, shooting her, then stabbing her in the head to make sure she wouldn't survive. In court, Betty was convicted as an accomplice and served less than 2 years in prison. Gary received life without parole, though his sentence was later reduced to second-degree murder, making him eligible for release after 21 years. For Maple's family, it felt like justice had been compromised. The trial ended, but the pain never did. For Maple's family, every day was a reminder of the future stolen from them. Her mother described the loss as losing the most precious jewel of her life. Her father admitted there was no peace because Maple was still gone. Her father admitted there was no peace because Maple was still gone. Friends remembered her brilliance, her laughter, and her dreams of becoming a doctor. To the community, she became a symbol of what jealousy and violence can destroy. Though courts delivered sentences, Maple's story stands as a warning and as a memory of a life filled with promise, cut short before it could truly begin. Justice, her family says, may have come on paper, but for them, Maple's absence is a wound that will never heal. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. December 1st, 2018. In Auckland, New Zealand, a 22-year-old British backpacker walks into the city to celebrate her birthday. Her name is Grace Millane, adventurous, free-spirited, and on the trip of a lifetime. That night, she matches on Tinder with a man who seems charming, confident, and eager to meet. CCTV cameras capture their evening together, laughing, kissing, moving from bar to bar. Grace even texts a friend, "It's going really well." But those would be the last words she ever sent. Within hours, Grace vanished. Within days, her family's worst fears would come true. And the man she trusted enough to spend her birthday with would be revealed not as a date, but as a killer. This is the case of Grace Millane. Grace Emmy Rose Millane was born in September 1996 in Essex, England, the youngest of 3 children. She grew up in a warm, loving family where she was known for her energy, humor, and kindness. Grace wasn't just bright, she was artistic too. She loved painting, photography, and documenting the world around her. At school, she excelled both in academics and sports. Friends described her as outgoing and adventurous, someone who was always ready to explore new places and meet new people. After finishing her studies, she went on to attend Lincoln University, where she graduated with a degree in marketing in 2018. Grace was at a crossroads. She could have gone straight into work, but she wanted more. She dreamed of seeing the world before settling down, so she set off on the kind of journey many young people only imagine. South America first, then on to New Zealand, where she planned to spend time traveling, hiking, and celebrating her 22nd birthday. Her family supported her decision, proud of her independence and courage. For Grace, this trip wasn't just about adventure. It was about embracing life fully, taking in every experience before she began her career back home. On December 1st, her birthday weekend, she opened Tinder in Auckland. Not unusual for a solo traveler wanting to meet someone new. It was here she connected with a man who seemed charming, confident, and eager to meet. His name was Jesse Kempson, a 26-year-old living in Auckland. On the surface, he appeared polite, social, and confident, the kind of man who could make a good first impression. But behind that mask was a much different reality. Jesse's childhood had been turbulent. Born in 1991, his family life was fractured, and his relationships with relatives were strained. By his mid-20s, those bonds had collapsed entirely. He drifted from one job to another, never holding stability for long. Financial struggles followed him everywhere. And instead of facing them, Jesse often turned to lies. He created a version of himself he wished was real. A man with steady work, a respectable background, and a promising future. In truth, he was insecure, deeply unsettled, and increasingly manipulative. Dating apps became his escape. They allowed him to reinvent himself with every match. To some women, he claimed he was successful and ambitious. To others, he spun stories of hardship to win sympathy. It was a pattern of charm, deceit, and control. Those who spent time with him described a troubling cycle. Jesse could be attentive and flattering one moment, then cold, secretive, or even menacing the next. What he lacked in stability, he tried to make up for in dominance. By late 2018, Jesse was spending much of his time online, scrolling through profiles and arranging dates. When Grace's photo appeared on his screen, she must have seemed like another opportunity, a bright, trusting traveler far from home. Grace saw only what Jesse wanted her to see. She agreed to meet him on her birthday weekend, December 1st. To her, it was an evening of celebration. To him, it was something far darker. On the evening of December 1st, 2018, Grace Millane walked into Auckland's bustling city center. It was her birthday weekend, the first she had ever spent so far from home. The city streets were alive with music, chatter, and neon lights spilling out of bars. Grace had spent months traveling, meeting strangers, and finding new adventures. That night, she had arranged one more. Through Tinder, she connected with Jesse Kempson. He was 26, a local, and had suggested meeting for drinks at Sky City, a popular entertainment complex. For Grace, it was nothing unusual. She had used dating apps before on her travels, and it felt like an easy way to meet new people in an unfamiliar place. CCTV cameras recorded the moment she arrived. Grace walked confidently into the building, her smile quick and natural. Jesse was already waiting, dressed neatly, carrying the air of a man eager to impress. To anyone else, they looked like two young people starting a casual night out. Over the next few hours, they moved from bar to bar, their every step captured on grainy surveillance footage. At one stop, Grace laughed openly, leaning closer as Jesse spoke. At another, they sat side by side, sipping drinks, their body language suggesting an easy comfort. They even shared a kiss, looking in that moment like any ordinary couple enjoying a night together. Grace sent a short text to a friend during the date. "It's going really well." Just 5 words, but they carried the excitement of a young woman enjoying herself on her birthday weekend. That message would be the last she ever sent. The date continued late into the night. Jesse suggested they return to his apartment. Grace agreed, unaware that every decision, every step was quietly sealing her fate. CCTV caught them again as they walked back through the city streets, arm in arm. Grace appeared relaxed, comfortable, even happy. Nothing in her demeanor suggested fear or hesitation. At the entrance to Jesse's apartment building, another camera picked up their arrival. The footage shows Grace walking confidently beside him, following him into the elevator. The doors slid shut, closing them off from the outside world. For Grace, it was just another part of a night out. For Jesse, it was the point where the mask of charm could finally fall away. That elevator ride would be the last time anyone ever saw Grace alive. What happened behind Jesse's apartment door was hidden from the cameras, but what investigators would later discover painted a chilling picture. Hours after they had walked inside together, Jesse was seen leaving the building alone. His expression was no longer animated, no longer engaged. Instead, he looked calm, almost detached, as if nothing unusual had happened. By the time the sun rose on December 2nd, Grace's phone was silent. Her family's birthday messages went unanswered. Her friends received no reply. Grace, who had been so full of life and curiosity, had vanished. Meanwhile, Jesse was already setting his next moves into motion. His calm demeanor on the CCTV would soon unravel into a disturbing trail of lies, cover-ups, and chilling actions that betrayed the truth of what really happened in his apartment that night. If you're still watching, please hit the like button. It won't cost you anything, but helps us a lot. And if you want to see more crime stories like this, make sure you subscribe to our channel. When daylight broke over Auckland on December 2nd, the city stirred to life as usual. But inside Jesse Kempson's apartment, the night before had already turned into something darker. Grace Millane, the young traveler who had walked in smiling, was gone. What happened behind closed doors was known only to Jesse, but what came next was documented in excruciating detail by CCTV and receipts. Instead of panic, instead of calling for help, Jesse began his day with cold calculation. That morning, he left the apartment alone. Cameras caught him moving calmly through the city, showing no trace of the chaos that had unfolded hours earlier. His first stop, a nearby store where he purchased cleaning products. Later, he was seen at another shop, carefully selecting a large suitcase. To outsiders, it looked like ordinary shopping. Investigators would later piece together the chilling reality. Jesse was preparing to conceal Grace's body. While he carried out his errands, Grace's family back in England sent her messages, wishing her a happy birthday. Each text went unanswered. Her friends, too, tried to reach her, confused by the sudden silence. For them, concern was only beginning to stir. For Jesse, the cover-up was already underway. By the afternoon, CCTV tracked him again. He returned to his apartment, the suitcase in hand. Hours later, he rented a car. Investigators would later discover where he drove. To the Waitakere Ranges, a remote area of dense bushland outside the city. But perhaps the most disturbing detail was what Jesse did in between. On the very same day Grace's family was desperately trying to reach her, Jesse was on another Tinder date. He met another woman for drinks just hours after Grace had vanished. And during that encounter, he let slip something chilling. He spoke about how someone could hide a body. The woman thought it was a bizarre, unsettling comment. She had no idea she was sitting across from a man who had already carried it out. Back at the apartment, Jesse continued cleaning. He scrubbed surfaces, erased traces, and rehearsed the story he would later tell police. To the outside world, he still looked like a man living an ordinary life. But his every move, every receipt, every camera frame was leaving behind a trail that would soon betray him. Meanwhile, Grace's phone remained silent. Her father, David Millane, grew increasingly alarmed when her messages stayed unread. For her to suddenly disappear was completely out of character. By the evening of December 2nd, Grace had officially gone missing. Jesse, however, carried on as though nothing had happened. He returned the rental car. He kept up appearances, and he blended back into the city. The young woman who had texted her friend just one night earlier, "It's going really well," had vanished without a trace. And the man she had trusted enough to spend her birthday with was already deep into a cover-up that shocked even experienced detectives. But despite Jesse's attempts to erase what he had done, he overlooked one thing. The city was watching. The cameras, the receipts, the timelines, all of it was waiting to expose him. By December 3rd, Grace Millane had been silent for 2 days. Her family in Essex grew increasingly alarmed as birthday calls and messages went unanswered. Grace was careful, independent, and always kept in touch with family, especially while traveling alone. For her to vanish without a word was deeply out of character. That same day, she was officially reported missing. New Zealand police launched an urgent inquiry, aware that the disappearance of a young foreign tourist could quickly turn serious. Detectives began building a timeline, retracing Grace's steps in the city on the night of December 1st. CCTV footage revealed the trail clearly. Grace was seen meeting Jesse Kempson at Sky City, then moving with him between several bars, drinking and laughing. The final images showed them entering Jesse's apartment building just before midnight. From there, the trail ended. Grace never walked out again. Detectives brought Jesse in for questioning. At first, he played the part of the cooperative date, calm, polite, and seemingly concerned. He told officers they had gone back to his apartment, but that Grace had left the next morning, alive and well. He claimed he had no idea what happened after, but police weren't convinced. His story didn't match the CCTV timeline. And as investigators dug deeper, the cracks widened. Jesse's financial records showed troubling purchases, cleaning products, a suitcase, and a rental car, all within hours of Grace's disappearance. His phone activity told a darker story, with late-night searches for violent pornography and disturbing questions about body disposal. Detectives searched his apartment and uncovered faint traces of blood, attempts at cleaning, and signs that a serious crime had taken place inside. By December 8th, just a week after Grace's disappearance, police had enough evidence to act. Jesse Kempson was arrested and charged with Grace's murder, even though her body had not yet been found. The arrest was a turning point. What began as a missing person investigation was now officially a homicide case. But detectives knew their work wasn't finished. Grace's family needed answers, and they needed to bring her home. With Jesse in custody, investigators turned to the next vital clue: GPS data from his rental car. The records showed he had driven west of Auckland into the Waitakere Ranges, a vast and rugged area of dense bushland. Search teams combed through the wilderness, bracing themselves for what they might find. On December 9th, their fears were confirmed. In a shallow grave, covered with soil and vegetation, lay the body of Grace Millane. For her family, the discovery was devastating. David Millane, who had flown halfway across the world in hope of finding his daughter, now faced the unbearable reality that she was gone. For New Zealand, the case that had gripped the nation took a darker turn. And for Jesse Kempson, the calm facade he had worn so convincingly in the interview room was shattered. The evidence, the CCTV, the receipts, the digital trail, and now Grace's body was overwhelming. The mask of charm had fallen away, and the truth of what happened on Grace's birthday night was finally coming into focus. When Jesse Kempson was led into the interrogation room, he carried himself with the same composure he had shown since Grace's disappearance. He didn't appear nervous or flustered. Instead, he leaned into the role he had played all along, the concerned man caught in an unfortunate situation. At first, Jesse repeated the story he had given detectives earlier. He claimed that after their night out, Grace had left his apartment the next morning, alive and well. He insisted he hadn't seen her since. His voice was calm, his answers measured. But across the table, investigators already had evidence that contradicted his every word. They pressed him with CCTV footage, pointing out that Grace was never seen leaving the building. They showed him receipts of the cleaning supplies and suitcase he had purchased the following day. They confronted him with the digital trail, the disturbing searches on his phone in the hours after Grace was last seen alive. Bit by bit, Jesse's version of events began to shift. He admitted that Grace hadn't left the apartment after all. Instead, he claimed something had gone wrong during what he described as consensual rough sex. According to him, she had asked to be choked and he had complied. But when she stopped breathing, he said, he panicked. To investigators, this was less a confession than an excuse. Jesse presented himself as the victim of circumstance, not the perpetrator of violence. He insisted he hadn't meant to harm Grace, that her death had been accidental. Yet the cold facts painted a different picture. The cleaning, the suitcase, the burial in the Waitakere Ranges. These weren't the actions of a man who had simply panicked. They were the calculated moves of someone desperate to cover his tracks. Still, the admission was crucial. For the first time, Jesse acknowledged that Grace had died in his apartment. He admitted to disposing of her body, though he framed it as a mistake made in fear rather than an act of murder. The detectives let him speak, documenting every word. His tone remained eerily controlled, even as he described carrying Grace's body out of the apartment and driving it into the bush. At moments he seemed detached, almost clinical, as though he were recounting someone else's story. What Jesse didn't realize was that his confession, instead of absolving him, tied him more firmly to the crime. His explanation of accidental rough sex would become the cornerstone of his defense, but it was a defense already collapsing under the weight of evidence. Grace's injuries, the timeline, the cover-up, all of it contradicted his claims. By the time the interrogation ended, investigators had the final piece they needed. Jesse had placed himself at the scene, admitted his role in Grace's death, and revealed the cold steps he had taken afterward. The mask of charm was gone. What remained was a confession that shocked a nation, not because it brought clarity, but because it revealed the chilling lengths a man would go to twist the truth. By November 2019, Jesse Kempson's case had reached the High Court in Auckland. The world was watching. Grace's family sat through every session, forced to hear the details of her final night, while Jesse's defense clung to the story he had first told detectives, that her death had been the result of consensual rough sex gone too far. Prosecutors dismantled that claim, piece by piece. They presented the chilling timeline: Jesse's searches for violent pornography, his purchase of cleaning supplies and a suitcase, the rental car that carried Grace's body to the Waitakere Ranges. The defense argued that Jesse never intended to kill Grace, that he had simply lost control in the heat of the moment. But the evidence told a different story, one of deception, calculation, and deliberate choices after her death. After days of testimony, the jury took less than 5 hours to reach their decision. Jesse Kempson was found guilty of murdering Grace Millane. At sentencing, the judge condemned his actions as callous and self-serving. Jesse showed no remorse, only silence, as he was handed a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. For Grace's family, the verdict brought justice, but no relief from their loss. Their daughter had been taken, her future stolen, by a man who had masked his darkness behind a smile. The trial was over, but the impact of Grace Millane's story had only just begun. Grace Millane set out on a journey to see the world, to celebrate her independence, her youth, and her love of adventure. She never returned home. Instead, her story became a warning about trust, deception, and the dangers that can hide behind a smile. Her murder sparked outrage, grief, and a global conversation about women's safety. But beyond the headlines and the courtroom, Grace should be remembered for who she was: a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman full of life and promise. Her family's words remain the truest legacy. She will forever be our sunshine. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. Mother's Day, 2021. A 13-year-old girl disappears before dawn in a quiet Florida neighborhood. Hours later, searchers uncover CCTV footage. She was walking with a boy. But just 2 hours later, that boy is seen again, running home barefoot, calm as he walked through his front door. The next day, police found Tristan's body. She had been stabbed more than 100 times. Why was she so comfortable walking with him? If he was that dangerous, why did he seem so ordinary? And when the truth finally came out, it revealed more than just a killer. Someone else tried to cover for him. The most haunting question remains: why? Why would a 14-year-old boy murder a girl who trusted him? This is the case of Tristyn Bailey, a story that shocked the world. Tristyn Bailey was 13 years old. She was the kind of girl who made people believe in possibility. She lived with an energy that seemed too big for her small Florida suburb, and yet it fit her perfectly. Cheerleading wasn't just her sport, it was her passion, the heartbeat of her daily life. She thrived on the mats, flipping and soaring with a confidence that drew the eyes of everyone in the gym. Coaches described her as fearless, the teammate who pushed others to give their best even when they were tired or discouraged. But cheerleading was only one part of her spark. Friends remembered her as the person who never let anyone feel invisible. She had a way of noticing people. The quiet kid at the back of the room, the friend having a bad day, the teammate doubting herself. With Tristan, you felt seen and you felt important. Her laugh carried, her smile disarmed, and her presence made ordinary moments unforgettable. At home, she was just as remarkable. Tristan was one of 5 siblings in a close-knit family. The Baileys were the kind of household where weekends were filled with chaos. Practices, games, school events, but also with love. Tristan's siblings looked up to her, especially her younger ones. She wasn't just a sister. She was a role model, quick to comfort, quick to protect. Her parents saw her as both driven and grounded. A daughter who set goals high, but never lost the sweetness of being a kid. While Tristan radiated light, there was another teenager in her orbit whose world was cast in shadow. His name was Aiden Fucci. Aiden wasn't her boyfriend, nor was he a close friend. He was simply a boy from her neighborhood, a familiar face from school, someone who moved in and out of the same circles. In a place where families left their doors unlocked and kids grew up together, their paths crossed easily. To Tristan, He was just another boy she knew. But beneath that ordinary surface, Aiden carried something darker. At 14, he was a freshman at Patriot Oaks Academy. Teachers described him as restless, easily frustrated, the kind of student who bristled at authority and felt disrespected if anyone challenged him. In class, he could be polite at times, but he also had a short fuse, a temper that didn't take much to ignite. Among his peers, Aiden had a different reputation. He liked to talk about violence, not the playful, exaggerated kind of talk that sometimes floats through teenage conversations, but specific, chilling fantasies. He told friends he wanted to kill someone, that he would find a person walking alone, drag them into the woods, and stab them. Some brushed it off as bravado, the kind of dark joke no one really expects to come true. But in hindsight, those words carried the weight of prophecy. At home, his behavior wasn't much better. He clashed with his mother, Crystal Smith, and often carried himself with the kind of simmering defiance that made discipline nearly impossible. There was nothing, at least on the surface, that would have told Tristan she needed to be afraid of him. But behind his blank stares and casual presence was a teenager quietly nurturing a fascination with death. A boy who wasn't content with imagining violence. He wanted to live it. And in the early hours of May 9th, 2021, he would turn that fantasy into reality. May 8th, 2021. The Saturday night before Mother's Day. Tristyn Bailey had spent the day like so many others, cheerful, energetic, surrounded by friends. She was 13, with the busy, full life of a girl deeply loved by her family and admired by her peers. Nothing suggested that this night would be different. After midnight, she left to meet someone she knew, Aiden Fucci. He wasn't her boyfriend, nor was he her closest friend. He was simply a boy from the neighborhood. There was nothing unusual about the two of them walking together late at night. At 1:14 a.m., security footage captured them side by side, two teenagers moving quietly through the streets of their community. There was no sign of tension, no warning of what was about to unfold. For Tristan, it may have felt like a harmless late-night adventure. For Aiden, it was something entirely different. That footage was the last time anyone saw Tristan alive. At 3:27 a.m., the same cameras caught Aiden again. This time, he was alone. He wasn't strolling anymore. He was running. His sneakers dangled from his hands, his bare feet hitting the pavement as he made his way back toward home. He moved quickly, with a purpose that raised more questions than answers. Hours later, as the sun rose on Mother's Day, the Bailey family began their mourning. Tristan's mother went to wake her daughter, expecting to find her curled in bed. Instead, the room was empty. Her phone was silent, her belongings untouched. The panic was immediate. Tristan wasn't the kind of girl who disappeared. Calls were made, neighbors alerted, and before long, the entire community knew she was missing. Volunteers fanned out across the neighborhood. Law enforcement joined the search, combing wooded areas, retention ponds, and trails. By midday, investigators had already reviewed surveillance video. They saw Tristan walking with Aiden. They saw him running home alone. Questions closed in quickly. Why was he the last person with her? Why had he returned without her? And what had happened in those missing hours between the two recordings? While searchers called her name into the woods, investigators turned their focus squarely on the 14-year-old boy next door. The Bailey home filled with panic the moment Tristan was reported missing. It wasn't like her to vanish. She was 13, responsible, connected to her family. By late morning, officers knocked on Aiden's door. He didn't resist when asked to come in for questioning. He slid into the back of a police car, a place most kids would sit in shock or fear. But Aiden treated it differently. He pulled out his phone, opened Snapchat, and posted a picture of himself with the caption, "Hey guys, has anyone seen Tristan lately?" It was the kind of arrogance that investigators couldn't ignore. While a family was desperate for answers, Aiden was turning a missing girl into a social media stunt. Inside the interrogation room, detectives pressed him. They told him he was the last one seen with her. They reminded him this was serious, that his words mattered. Aiden shrugged, avoided eye contact, acted detached. He didn't look like a boy terrified about his missing friend. He looked like someone trying not to care. Meanwhile, investigators were searching his home. In his bedroom, they found clothes with dark stains. Tests would later confirm the truth. The blood belonged to Tristyn Bailey. And then came the stories from his classmates. One after another, they described things Aiden had said in the weeks before. He wanted to kill someone, he told them. He talked about dragging a person into the woods, stabbing them, watching them die. Most had brushed it off as sick teenage talk. But now, with Tristan missing, those words felt like a confession spoken in advance. The Bailey family clung to hope as the day stretched on. Search parties scoured retention ponds, wooded trails, and culverts. Police dogs sniffed through brush. Helicopters scanned from above. Every call for Tristan echoed with dread. But detectives already feared the truth. This wasn't a case of a lost child. This wasn't a runaway. Too much evidence was pointing in one direction. The boy who had walked with Tristan into the night was the key to where she was now. As the sun dropped on Mother's Day, hope was running thin. The Bailey family had spent the entire day clinging to the chance that Tristan would walk back through the door. Neighbors had searched every corner of the community. Deputies and volunteers had covered ponds, ditches, wooded trails. Nothing. But just before sundown, deputies expanded their search deeper into the woods. Less than half a mile from Aiden Fuji's home. It was there, hidden in the brush near a retention pond, that they found her. 13-year-old Tristyn Bailey. She had been stabbed 114 times. 49 of those wounds were defensive, marks that told investigators she had fought for her life, raising her arms and hands, desperate to stop the blade. The brutality was staggering. Even seasoned detectives were shaken. This wasn't a moment of panic or a single act of violence. It was an assault carried out with obsession, with rage, with something far darker than anyone had imagined. The news hit the Bailey family with devastating force. That morning, they had woken with hope. By nightfall, their daughter was gone. For the community, the grief was just as sharp. Mothers hugged their children tighter. Parents locked doors earlier. The sense of safety that defined the neighborhood had been shattered. Back at the sheriff's office, detectives confronted Aiden with the discovery. He now knew what they knew. Tristan was dead, and her blood had already been found on his clothes. His reaction was cold. No collapse, no visible remorse. If anything, he seemed distant, detached from the horror of what he had done. The decision came quickly. Aiden Fuji was under arrest, charged with first-degree murder. He was only 14, but prosecutors announced he would be tried as an adult. The brutality demanded it. And then another twist. As investigators combed through evidence, they uncovered footage from inside Aiden's own home. On the video, his mother, Crystal Smith, could be seen taking a pair of jeans from his room. Jeans stained with blood. She carried them into the bathroom, tried scrubbing them in the sink, then placed them in the wash. Tests later confirmed the stains were Tristan's blood. For that, she was charged with tampering with evidence. For the Bailey family, the shock deepened. Not only had their daughter been murdered by a boy she knew, but his mother had tried to erase the proof. By the following morning, the case was everywhere. Local stations led with it. National outlets picked it up. The words were chilling. A 13-year-old cheerleader stabbed more than 100 times by a 14-year-old neighbor. A story that sounded too monstrous to believe. Except it was real. The arrest marked the end of the search, but not the end of the nightmare. Ahead lay the slow grind of court hearings, evidence, and testimony. The Baileys would face not only their grief, but the boy who had taken Tristan from them. And as the case moved forward, one question hung heavy in the air. Why? Why would a teenager kill a girl he barely knew with such brutality? The answer, when it came, offered no comfort. The arrest of 14-year-old Aiden Fucci sent shockwaves through Florida. A boy barely into his teens was facing a charge usually reserved for hardened killers, first-degree murder. Prosecutors moved fast, announcing he would be tried as an adult. The brutality of 114 stab wounds left no room for leniency. Aiden's first court appearances only deepened public anger. At times, he mumbled incoherently, claiming voices were taking his soul. At other moments, he appeared blank, distant, as though the gravity of the charges barely registered. For the Bailey family, sitting only feet away, the sight of the boy who had slaughtered their daughter showing no sign of remorse was unbearable. Then came the revelation about his mother, Crystal Smith. The video footage was undeniable. She had carried his blood-stained jeans into the bathroom, scrubbed them in the sink, and placed them in the wash. For that, she was charged with tampering with evidence. It was a betrayal that stung the community. A parent choosing to hide her son's crime rather than face the truth. Months passed as hearings dragged on. And then, in February 2023, Aiden stood before the judge and pleaded guilty. No trial. No arguments about innocence. Just a single word. Guilty. It shifted the proceedings into a penalty phase. The question was no longer if he killed Tristan, but how long he would pay for it. That's when the Bailey family took the stand. Their statements cut through the courtroom with raw pain. Tristan's older sister carried a jar filled with 114 stones, one for every stab wound her little sister endured. Her words were haunting. Did she see you coming at her with a knife? Or did you stab her while she wasn't paying attention? Did she scream out for help, or was she paralyzed with agony? Did she cry for my mother? Did she beg you to stop? Did you hear her lungs gargling with blood? Did you stay to watch her die, or did you leave her in pain as you ran away? Each question landed like a blow. They were questions only Aiden could answer, but he never would. Tristan's best friend spoke next, describing the laughter and dreams stolen from her life. Her mother painted the picture of milestones she would never see. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren. Her father looked Aiden in the eye and told him his apology meant nothing. Finally, Judge R. Lee Smith delivered his decision. He called the attack premeditated, brutal, and beyond redemption. Then he sentenced Aiden Fucci to life in prison, with a review possible after 25 years. For the Bailey family, there was no real justice. Nothing could bring Tristan back. But as deputies led Aiden away in shackles, there was at least certainty. The boy who had stolen her life would never again walk free without the shadow of his crime. The case closed, but the echoes remained. A jar of stones, a sister's unanswered questions, a family left with memories instead of milestones. Tristyn Bailey's life was short, just 13 years, but it was filled with light, love, and promise. That light was extinguished in the darkest way imaginable, but it will never be forgotten. In October 2015, 21-year-old Dutch medical student Sophia Kutzier vanished deep inside Uganda's Murchison Falls National Park. She had traveled there for a medical internship, but her journey ended in mystery. At around 6:30 p.m. on October 28th, Sophia picked up a small empty bottle she used for collecting trash and walked toward the camp's latrines. A staff member later recalled seeing her pause for a moment, quietly gazing toward the Nile River as the last light of day faded. That brief glimpse was the final time anyone saw her alive. Minutes later, she was gone, vanished without a sound. Local authorities quickly closed the case, claiming Sophia had been attacked and dragged away by a wild animal. But the evidence scattered across the riverbank told a darker, far more sinister story. Sophia Isabella Frederica Koetsier was born on April 2, 1994, in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. She grew up in a close-knit family with her parents, Gerard and Maria, and two younger siblings. Friends described her as intelligent, empathetic, and full of energy. From an early age, Sophia showed talent in the performing arts, attending the Amsterdam Youth Theatre School. Later, her ambition shifted toward medicine. She enrolled in university and worked part-time jobs to support herself, juggling studies with babysitting and handing out flyers. She excelled academically, earning her bachelor's degree in medicine and setting her sights on a specialization in tropical medicine, a field that matched her desire to help people and explore the world. Outside academics, she thrived in sports, playing basketball and hockey, and enjoyed running in Amsterdam's Vondelpark. Her adventurous spirit pushed her to seek experiences far beyond home. That drive took her to Uganda in August 2015 for an 8-week internship at Lubaga Hospital in Kampala. Sophia quickly made an impression. Colleagues admired her dedication and willingness to take on any task, from assisting in surgeries to cleaning floors. She embraced the culture, learned basic Luganda to connect with locals, and shared her daily experiences with her family. Children in the neighborhood adored her, often following her around just to be near her. Yet her life wasn't without struggle. At 16, Sophia was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She managed it with medication and support, determined not to let it define her future. Despite challenges, she carried herself with optimism and curiosity. By October 2015, she had completed her internship, but wasn't ready to leave. Instead, she extended her stay, eager to see more of Uganda's landscapes and wildlife. After finishing her hospital work in late October 2015, Sophia chose not to fly home immediately. Instead, she extended her stay by 2 weeks to explore Uganda's natural beauty. On October 23rd, she joined 2 fellow Dutch students and a local guide for a multi-day safari across the country. The group's itinerary was ambitious: Fort Portal, Kadepo Valley National Park, Gulu, and Pakwach, before heading to their final destination, Murchison Falls National Park. Known for its dramatic waterfall on the Victoria Nile and dense wildlife, the park promised a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Traveling between sites, Sophia remained enthusiastic. She photographed landscapes, spoke with locals, and collected souvenirs. Though her companions later recalled moments of restlessness, nothing suggested she wouldn't complete the trip. The safari moved forward without major issues until the group reached Murchison Falls on October 28th. That afternoon, they took a boat ride along the Victoria Nile, observing hippos, crocodiles, and elephants. Afterward, they returned to the Uganda Wildlife Authority's Student Education Center, a simple camp with small cabins, shared latrines, and open common areas. It wasn't luxurious, but it offered shelter in the heart of the park. As the sun began to set, Sophia appeared calm and content. Around 6:30 p.m., She picked up a small empty bottle she used for collecting trash and walked toward the latrines. A staff member noticed her nearby, briefly gazing toward the river in the fading light. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. When she didn't return, her companions checked the latrines, then searched the camp. Minutes turned to hours, but there was no sign of Sophia. Within 15 minutes of realizing she was missing, they alerted rangers, and a search began in the darkness. The first hours of the search were frantic. Rangers swept the area with flashlights, while Sophia's friends tried a desperate tactic, playing her favorite song, Isabella by Sauti Sol, on repeat in their vehicle, hoping the sound might draw her back. The park quickly grew silent, broken only by the hum of insects and the rush of the river. There was no response. By 9 p.m., nearly 3 hours after she vanished, one of the students contacted her family in the Netherlands. Her mother, Maria, was immediately alerted and began preparing to travel to Uganda. That night, rangers continued searching on foot, but the dense vegetation and risk of predators made progress slow. At sunrise on October 29, the operation expanded. Rangers, police, and later the Ugandan military combed the surroundings. Helicopters flew overhead while boats patrolled the Nile. Around midday, a crucial clue surfaced. The small plastic bottle Sophia had carried was found roughly 5 meters from the riverbank. Its position raised troubling questions. Why would she walk toward the river at dusk alone? The terrain between the camp and the water was steep, covered in thick brush, and dangerous at night. Crocodiles, hippos, and elephants roamed the area. Yet there were no screams, no footprints, and no drag marks. The following day, October 30th, another disturbing discovery was made. Scattered about 50 meters from where the bottle lay were Sophia's belongings: a pair of hiking pants, a shoe, sunglasses, a torn banknote, and a souvenir bag. Pieces of fabric, believed to be from her pants, were caught in a tree branch nearly 5 meters above the ground. The way the items were spread out looked unnatural. Searchers insisted they hadn't seen them during the first sweep, suggesting they might have been placed there later. More puzzling was the absence of blood, tracks, or signs of a struggle. Survival experts later concluded the pants had been deliberately cut, not torn by an animal. Despite these inconsistencies, local authorities leaned toward a simple explanation. Sophia had wandered too close to the river and fallen victim to wildlife. It was an easy answer for a national park reliant on tourism, but one that ignored the unanswered questions. Her family, now on the ground in Uganda, pushed for answers. For them, the evidence pointed. By the morning of October 29th, the disappearance had escalated from a camp search to a full-scale operation. Rangers and soldiers combed the forest on foot. Dogs were brought in, and boats scanned the Nile's edges. Helicopters circled above, but every sweep came back empty. Sophia's family landed in Uganda quickly. Her mother, Maria, traveled straight to Murchison Falls, desperate to join the search. She had seen her daughter just weeks earlier in Kampala and could not accept the official line that Sophia had simply wandered off into the wilderness. Authorities, however, leaned heavily on the theory of an animal attack. It was convenient. The park was known for crocodiles and hippos, and accidents were not unheard of. But that explanation clashed with the evidence. No blood, no drag marks, no clothing torn the way predators would shred fabric. The items found near the river appeared suspiciously staged. Experts began questioning the scene. Survival investigator Thomas Coyne studied photos of the pants and concluded they had been cut with a knife. Pieces of fabric tangled high in a tree were impossible to explain as natural animal behavior. Even more troubling, Rangers admitted they hadn't noticed those belongings during their first pass. Their sudden appearance, nearly 2 days later, raised the possibility of tampering. Sophia's companions gave statements describing her final hours. They said she had been restless, but not suicidal, and insisted she would never have walked alone into dangerous terrain at night. Their accounts clashed with the quick dismissal by Ugandan officials, but who seemed eager to close the case. Meanwhile, Maria pressed relentlessly. She demanded every trace of her daughter's belongings be preserved and later sent to the Netherlands for forensic testing. The results revealed DNA consistent with Sophia, but also traces of an unknown male. This single detail suggested the unthinkable: human involvement. Still, no body was found. No footprints, no trail, nothing beyond scattered possessions. The search dragged on for days, then weeks, with each lead collapsing into silence. For Maria, it was becoming clear: if she wanted answers, she would have to fight for them herself. From the beginning, Ugandan authorities leaned on the simplest explanation. Sophia had been attacked by wildlife. The park was filled with crocodiles, hippos, and predators. To them, it was an unfortunate accident in a dangerous environment. But for investigators and her family, too many details didn't fit. The first problem was the scene itself. If an animal had dragged Sophia, there should have been torn ground, blood, or tissue. None were found. Instead, her belongings appeared unnaturally scattered. Some discovered in plain sight nearly 2 days after the initial sweep. A pair of pants cut into pieces, fabric caught in a tree, sunglasses, and a shoe, placed rather than lost. Survival experts argued no animal would shred clothing into neat strips or leave items perched in branches. To them, the scene looked staged. Attention soon turned towards Sophia's mental health. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 16, she occasionally experienced manic episodes marked by impulsive decisions and erratic behavior. Witnesses later recalled signs of sleeplessness, non-stop talking, and restlessness in the days before her disappearance. Authorities suggested she might have wandered into danger or even harmed herself. But her family rejected that theory. Sophia had never attempted self-harm, was excited about her future, and was in close contact with loved ones every day. Her condition explained little about the staged evidence. Another possibility was voluntary disappearance. Could she have chosen to vanish? Investigators explored it, but nothing supported the idea. She had plans for further study, strong ties to her family, and no reason to abandon her life. The most chilling theory pointed to human involvement. Forensic tests conducted in the Netherlands confirmed the items found near the river carried Sophia's DNA, alongside DNA from an unidentified male. That discovery, combined with the suspicious placement of her belongings, suggested the possibility of abduction or foul play. Further suspicions arose when it emerged that 400 wildlife recruits were training at a camp less than 2 kilometers from where Sophia disappeared. Their presence had not been disclosed in the early reports, raising concerns about unchecked alibis. A retired wildlife officer later stated he had seen Sophia with another officer on the night she vanished, though that man denied the encounter and was never formally questioned. Theories of human trafficking also surfaced. Murchison Falls, though a protected park, was not free from criminal activity. Sophia, a young foreigner traveling in a vulnerable mental state, may have been targeted. The unknown DNA and the carefully staged evidence gave weight to this possibility. Each theory left gaps, but all exposed flaws in the official narrative. If it was truly an animal attack, Why did the evidence suggest human interference? If it was self-harm, why was there no body, no note, and no history pointing to that outcome? If it was kidnapping, why cover it up so quickly? What began as a simple missing person case was now riddled with contradictions, unanswered questions, and the haunting possibility of deliberate concealment. Her persistence reached Dutch media, where Sophia's case received far greater attention than in Uganda. Public pressure mounted, forcing limited inquiries to reopen. Yet delays, political distractions, and the pandemic slowed momentum. In June 2025, the first trial connected to the case began, not for Sophia's disappearance, but against her safari guide, Michael Kajumbu. He had been operating without a valid license, a factor officials argued reflected negligence. But the proceedings offered no answers about what truly happened to Sophia. For Maria, the fight is ongoing. She continues fundraising, hiring private investigators, and demanding DNA comparisons. Nearly a decade later, she is still searching for the truth about her daughter's fate. Almost a decade later, the truth about Sophia's disappearance remains hidden. Was she really taken by a wild animal, as Ugandan authorities insisted? Or was the scene staged to protect someone or something far more sinister? The unanswered questions are chilling. Why did her belongings surface only after earlier searches? Whose DNA was mixed with hers? Why was the presence of hundreds of recruits nearby concealed? And why has no one been held accountable despite mounting inconsistencies? For her mother, the fight continues, but for the world, the case lingers in shadows, half tragedy, half mystery. Sophia Kutzier's story is more than a disappearance. It is a haunting reminder of how quickly truth can be buried. What do you believe happened that night at Murchison Falls? Accident, cover-up, or crime? The answer may never be clear, but the questions refuse to die. It was his daughter's birthday, but instead of celebration, 54-year-old Conrad Imowitch was found in his Michigan home, his body covered in horrific chemical burns, his organs beginning to shut down in ways doctors struggled to explain. What happened inside that house would tear apart a family, expose years of dysfunction, and leave investigators asking one chilling question: how did a birthday party turn into a nightmare? Konrad Imirowicz lived in Pontiac, Michigan with his 3 children. His wife was no longer in the household. He had a long history of heavy drinking that repeatedly caused problems at home. Over time, his alcoholism affected daily life, caregiving responsibilities, and family stability. One of his children was his daughter, Megan, who was about to turn 18 in the fall of 2021. Megan lived in the same house and frequently clashed with her father over household needs and money. These disagreements were recorded by friends and family as recurring disputes, often centered on responsibility and access to funds. On multiple occasions, residents and relatives reported that Konrad was intoxicated and difficult to wake. He often slept through parts of the day and was unreliable with basic household tasks. When his drinking increased, other members of the family stepped in to manage essential chores and medical appointments. Megan, still a teenager, found herself carrying many of those burdens. By late September 2021, Megan was planning an 18th birthday celebration and expected some financial support from Konrad. She requested funds and access to his credit card for party expenses and a hair appointment. Konrad refused to provide the money and declined repeated requests for his PIN. The refusal escalated into a heated argument on October 1st, 2021. Witnesses later described the exchange as more than a typical family fight. It was a confrontation driven by frustration over money and care responsibilities. At the time of the argument, Konrad was heavily intoxicated, which contributed to the breakdown in communication. That confrontation became the immediate catalyst for the events that follow. Within a very short window on that same day, Megan made a decision that would lead to criminal charges and a fatal outcome for Konrad. Family members later told investigators that such fights were common and that Megan had repeatedly expressed anger about caring for an intoxicated parent. Those statements were noted during the police investigation and medical records. On October 1st, 2021, Megan was preparing for the hotel party she insisted her father would pay for. By that afternoon, she went to the basement where Konrad was lying on the couch. He was unresponsive, and when he didn't answer her demands for the bank card PIN, her frustration boiled over. At first, she threw small items to wake him, but when that failed, she reached for a container nearby, a mixture containing lye, a highly corrosive chemical. In one impulsive act, she poured it directly onto him. The effect was immediate. Konrad's skin began to blister, his face and chest turning raw. He shouted in pain, but Megan walked away, more concerned with continuing her birthday plans. Konrad remained in the basement, badly injured and alone. Hours passed before anyone realized the severity of what had happened. Later that evening, Megan casually mentioned the incident to her friend Kayla, even sending her a photo of Konrad lying motionless. Alarmed, Kayla urged her to check on him again. When she did, Konrad's body was already showing signs of chemical poisoning, his legs turning green, his fingertips purple. Kayla eventually convinced Megan to call her older brother, Austin. When Austin arrived, he found his father barely conscious, his skin peeling, the air filled with the smell of chemicals. He immediately called 911. Paramedics rushed Konrad to the hospital. The diagnosis was grim: third-degree chemical burns covering nearly a fifth of his body. His trachea and esophagus were corroded, making it impossible for him to breathe normally. He was placed on a ventilator, given dialysis for kidney failure, and underwent multiple skin graft surgeries. Over the following months, Konrad fought to survive. Doctors amputated portions of his legs in a desperate attempt to stop the spread of infection, but the injuries were too severe. On March 6, 2022, 5 months after the attack, Konrad died from organ failure directly caused by the burns. By then, Megan was already in police custody. Evidence collected at the house, combined with her own admissions to friends, left no doubt about what had happened. A teenager's outburst during a birthday dispute had escalated into a fatal crime, one that shocked even seasoned investigators. Megan's first arrest actually came months before Konrad's death. In October 2021, only days after the attack, police took her into custody on charges of assault with intent to cause great bodily harm. Investigators already had her Snapchat messages, witness statements, and photos showing her father burned and unable to move. She posted bond and was released, but the case was still open as Konrad fought for his life. During those months, detectives continued to collect evidence. The basement couch where Konrad had been found showed a white chemical residue. A lye container was recovered nearby. Forensic testing confirmed the substance matched the burns that covered his skin. Kayla, the friend who had seen him shortly after the attack, gave a detailed statement about his purple fingertips, green legs, and the PIN number she had overheard him trying to shout despite his condition. Doctors, too, provided records showing the clear medical link between the chemical exposure and Konrad's rapid decline. His trachea had been burned, his kidneys were failing, and both legs eventually required amputation. On March 6, 2022, Konrad finally succumbed to his injuries. His death certificate listed complications of chemical burns as the cause. With that confirmation, prosecutors elevated the case from assault to homicide. Within days, Megan was arrested again, this time charged with killing her father. Police emphasized that while the initial arrest covered the assault itself, the homicide charge could only be filed once Konrad had died as a direct result of those injuries. By this point, the case had already divided those who knew the family. Some argued Megan's behavior showed years of resentment boiling over into violence. Others claimed the chaotic home and Konrad's alcoholism had created an environment where tragedy felt inevitable. For investigators, however, the focus was clear. Konrad had been doused with a caustic chemical, and Megan was the one who poured it. Her upcoming trial would determine not just her guilt, but also what punishment, if any, she should face for a crime that left her father dead. After Konrad's death, prosecutors escalated the case. Megan wasn't just facing an assault charge anymore. She was charged with second-degree murder, a crime that carries up to life in prison in Michigan. On paper, she could have spent decades, even her entire life, behind bars. In court, prosecutors presented their case: a bottle of lye recovered from the basement, residue on the couch where Konrad collapsed, and medical evidence showing the chemical burns directly caused his death. Jurors heard about the days leading up to the attack. Witnesses recalled Megan's anger when her father refused to give her money. Friends testified about texts where she admitted throwing things at him. Doctors described how the lye destroyed his airway, kidneys, and skin, injuries that made survival impossible. The defense countered by stressing Megan's age and unstable home life. They claimed Konrad's alcoholism contributed to the tragedy, even suggesting he might have exposed himself to the chemical. They asked the jury to see her as a teenager lashing out, not a cold-blooded killer. But prosecutors pointed to her own words. First, she denied throwing anything. Then she admitted tossing bread. Later, she conceded she poured liquid, but minimized the danger. These contradictions painted her as unreliable. Family testimony carried heavy weight. Austin described finding his father burned and barely alive. Julie shared how she tried to prepare their home for Konrad's hospice return, only to lose him days later. When closing arguments ended, the question wasn't guilt, it was punishment. Prosecutors asked for 7 years. Defense argued for leniency. The judge's decision stunned observers. Instead of life in prison, instead of 7 years, Megan received 1 year in jail, credited as time served, plus 5 years of probation. Conditions included earning her GED, a 9 p.m. curfew, and wearing an ankle monitor. For many, it was unthinkable. A father dead from chemical burns, and his daughter walking free after just a year. The sentence landed like a shockwave. Megan had faced the possibility of life in prison, yet she walked away with probation. Public reaction was immediate and divided. Many saw it as a miscarriage of justice, arguing that Konrad's suffering demanded far more than a symbolic punishment. Social media filled with outrage, calling the outcome a betrayal of his memory. Others, though, believed the court had made the right call. They saw Megan as a damaged teen from a fractured family, someone who needed guidance, not decades in a cell. Despite the anger, Megan walked out of custody a free woman. Her probation came with restrictions, finishing her education, following a nightly curfew, and wearing an ankle monitor. These measures were meant to keep her under control, but they didn't erase the fact that she had avoided prison. By 2024, reports confirmed she had even married, moving forward with her life while her father's remained tragically cut short. For the family, healing was impossible. Austin, the son who found Konrad in agony, carries memories no sentence could erase. Julie, who tended to Konrad in his final days, saw her daughter return to society while her husband was gone forever. And that's the heart of the debate. Was justice served? Did the court show mercy to a misguided teenager? Or did it minimize the value of a man's life? Konrad lost everything: his future, his dignity, his life. Megan lost a year, then gained a second chance. The contrast is haunting. She once faced life in prison. Instead, she walked free. Was that an act of mercy or a mistake? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was justice served or was it denied? And if you want more true crime stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe.